We're back here at SwamiLee's Sports Talk. I'm SwamiLee.
I'm Mellow Mike.
And we have a topic today. Since Mike has no creativity, we're getting with me today. And we're going to discuss some of the best and worst, you heard me, best and worst Phillies trades of the past 45 years. Mike, let's start out with your favorite Phillies trade since 1975.
Well, I'd have to say that my favorite Phillies trade since 1975 is the trade that brought even though it didn't bring us a championship.
Somehow I knew this was going to be the answer.
It's the trade that brought Roy Halladay.
I knew that was going to be the answer. And the trade that proved the Phillies minor league system is terrible, as the Blue Jays got nothing for Roy Halladay. Do you remember the participants of that trade?
I remember Kyle Drabek
and Michael Taylor and Travis d'Arnaud. I mean, d'Arnaud's a mediocre, top 25 catcher, but the rest of the guys were nothing.
Yeah.
But I knew that was what you were going to say. I knew that.
Well, the reason I hesitated was because I was actually going in a different direction first.
What's that?
I was going to say the trade that brought the Phillies Jamie Moyer in 06.
You know what's funny? I don't remember. I do not remember that trade. I mean, I obviously remember Moyer. I remember him coming here. I remember him almost coming here as a free agent a few years before that. And I remember running into either his father or his father-in-law at a card show.
Wasn't his father Digger Phelps?
Maybe that was his father-in-law. Maybe
his father-in-law.
Maybe I saw his father because it was in central Pennsylvania. And we were talking. I remember saying to his father, I really wanted him to come here. And he didn't. So, do you remember who was in that trade?
Jamie Moyer.
They got him for nothing?
I really do not remember who they gave up.
I don't either. This is a rarity, but I have zero, and I mean zero memory of that. So we'll move on. Mike, what was the worst trade? Your most hated trade? How about I word it that way? Not even the worst. Your most hated trade.
Well, my most hated trade was one when we were about 13 years old, and I bought into the hype. And I blame I blame Pete Rose for this. 5 for 1.
I know. I was going to say. I knew exactly what you were talking about when you said it 13 years ago. The sad part about that trade, that 5 for 1 trade, that wasn't so bad. Jerry Willard, Jay Baller, George Vukovich were nothing. Okay, the Phillies gave up Julio Franco,
who was the best player in the trade,
and they gave up a Manny Trio, who they were getting rid of anyway. So I mean, the Manny Trio era was over in Philly. So as much as we all loved him, he wasn't coming back. But if you were to make a almost 1 for 1 trade, Von Hayes for Julio Franco at the time of the trade, it wasn't so bad. And you're talking to the #1 guy that hates Von Hayes. But it wasn't so bad. But yes, Pete Rose hanging the 5 for 1 on him didn't help matters any.
Well, if it wasn't for that, then my least favorite trade is one that was probably nobody else's least favorite trade. It was the trade where they got rid of that Johnny Oates.
Johnny Oates. Okay, let's see. Oates was traded in 1976, the year after, 1977, the year after he was rammed by Dave Parker and it knocked him out for the season at home plate. Oates was traded to the Braves. And I do not remember the return. Do you remember the return?
I do not, but I was such a Johnny Oates fan as a 7- and 8-year-old, surprisingly, that I hated that they gave up on him.
Well, they had Bob Boone already.
And they had Tim McCarver pitching every fifth day, or catching every fifth day at that point.
Keep in the back of your mind, they had Larry Cox, they had Jim Essien, who would all be traded in that same era of time. They had that Bill Naharodny, who was in the minor league system. All these future major leaguers were at catcher also, of which none of them stayed there. But they had a lot of catching prospects at that time. What else, Mike? What other bad trades cross your mind?
Well,
And again, they don't have to be bad trades necessarily. Just trades you didn't like. I mean, I can think of one off the top of my head.
I know you can, and that's one that I am.
There's no need for
I'm staying away.
There's
from.
no need for you to bring that one up because if anybody has watched even a single one of my videos, you probably know that my feelings about the Ryan Sandberg trade. So we're going to skip over that one completely.
Well, I gotta say, I was, I know that his best days, in hindsight, his best days were already behind him at the time of this trade, but I was not happy that they gave up on Juan Samuel, even though it netted them Dykstra, it netted them McDowell.
That was I don't have any inside information. If I had to bet, there was a reason for that trade. In other words, they wanted to move Juan Samuel for whatever reason. It was a good trade. It was a good trade. Juan Samuel had peaked. He was not the player they thought he was going to be. And they did bring back a solid relief pitcher and a replacement for him that brought a real spark to the team. So that turned out to be a pretty good trade for the team itself.
Yes, it was. Now here's a question, and maybe this goes back to the Phillies not being able to judge talent or develop talent. But as I recall, in 1983, Willie Hernandez was a good contributing arm out of the bullpen.
You mean Willie?
No, I don't mean
Guillermo Hernandez.
No, he wasn't Guillermo till '84.
Well, actually, he was Guillermo from birth.
Well, that's true, but he didn't want to be called Guillermo.
Actually, he probably did want to be called Guillermo, but they couldn't. You know how it was with baseball. The same people that called him Bob Clemente instead of Roberto, and he never asked to be called Bob. And do you know that Willie Hernandez came up with the Phillies initially?
I'm not sure I recall that.
And he was. So, but again, I'm not saying that was a good trade because it was hindsight 2020. But they got Glenn Wilson, and Glenbo knocked in 100 runs. Okay, he fizzled out so fast. And then when they traded Glenn Wilson, they got Phil Bradley.
Who forgot how to play once he came here,
like everybody else who comes over to the Phillies. But I mean, the Guillermo chain, in theory, was good because Glenbo gave them like 2 good seasons, and Phil Bradley was a really good player to bring in until he played here, and then he wasn't good anymore. But he was. So you see what I'm saying? It would have worked itself out. Now I'm going to bring up a trade for you, Mike. Now.
Well, actually, I have a question for you.
Yes. What might that be?
Now, let's leave aside hindsight because we all know how this trade turned out. But at the time, what were your feelings about the Curt Schilling trade prior to the 1992 season?
You mean for the Phillies?
Yeah.
They gave up a scrub reliever and they got a scrub starter back. That was it. I was in Baltimore when Schilling came up.
I remember.
I attended an Orioles game where he pitched and he got shelled. It was either the Angels or the Tigers shelled him. Okay, he was bad. I remember the Curt Schilling trade from Boston to Baltimore. I was laughing at that trade, and then the Curt Schilling trade to Houston. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe the Orioles got Glenn Davis for those scrubs. I mean, things change, but I'm more concerned. I'm not concerned so much with that. Let me tell you deals that concern me. When the Phillies traded Gary Redus for Joe going back to Cowley, okay, that's a trade I remember being ticked off at. I was always a big Gary Redus fan, and Joe Cowley stunk. Period. The end. Why would you trade Gary Redus for Joe Cowley?
I can tell you why.
Because you're drunk?
I mean, Gary Redus was a nice player. He was a player who was probably more liked than his production on the field justified.
We only had 1 year here, so it's not like he had a lot of chances.
But the point is, realistically, Joe Cowley, based on prior performance, should have been a serviceable 4th arm out of the starting rotation.
He literally made, 5 starts and his career was over?
He made 5 starts. His ERA was well above 10 when he was here.
Well,
but that trade was one that wouldn't have looked so bad if Cowley had simply followed his career trajectory instead of falling off a cliff.
Well, here's a good trade. when the Phillies traded Mr. T, Al Holland, for Kent DeColby. That was a win. DeColby played well for a long time. And again, we're skipping over the no-brainer trades. The Bobby Abreu trade was a no-brainer trade for Kevin Stocker. I mean, I don't know who was smoking what in Tampa when that deal was made. But getting DeColby for all those years for Al Holland, pretty damn good deal. What else you got, Mike?
Okay, well, we've talked about trades in the 70s and the 80s and the 2000s. So let's talk about the 90s.
I try to forget the 90s.
Well,
for a lot of reasons.
We're going to stay away from Abreu for Stocker for obvious reasons.
Right.
So, were there any trades in the 90s that either got you pumped or got under your craw?
The 90s was almost a forgotten era of Phillies baseball. If you really think about it. I mean, yeah, they had the 93 team, but the rest of it was just so forgettable. One of the main trades that comes to my mind was when the Phillies, there was a trade, a waiver gaffe by the Pirates, and the Phillies ended up getting 3 players for Carmelo Martinez. You know who those 3 players are?
I do not.
That Wesley Polk Chamberlain, the Julio Peguero, and the future. Oh, what was the future's name? The guy was the future for like 5 years. He kept getting shin splints. It was over and over again. His name escapes me.
What position did he play?
He was when he rarely played, it was as an outfielder. But the point is, Wes Chamberlain I thought was going to be a really good player, and Carmelo Martinez was no big deal. So from that perspective,
I think it's safe to say that Wes Chamberlain might have been Dominic Brown before Dominic Brown was born.
no, because Wes Chamberlain was never that highly like Dominic Brown was supposed to be the man. The Phillies would not include him in the trade for Roy Halladay. I mean, that's how big a deal it was. Chamberlain again, he turned out to be a very mediocre player, but he was that was a big trade at the time because the Pirates GM screwed something up and he exposed players to waivers and he had to make the trade. So he took Carmelo Martinez to get those players back. Other than that, I mean, I got to tell you, I mean, I am sitting here thinking about the 90s.
Okay, then let's forget about the 90s as they should be forgotten.
I've tried for many years to do so.
Well, you said we'll stay away from the first Abreu trade, but what do you feel about the trade for Abreu that ended his time here in Philadelphia?
Great trade. Who'd we get?
Corey Lytle. Unfortunately, he kind of crashed and burned,
No
but
pun
that's not the
intended.
point of the trade.
It was time for Bobby Abreu to go. The team got better when he was off the team. So that was a good addition by subtraction trade.
And although I ordinarily hate cliches, in this instance, that is a great example of addition by subtraction.
Without a doubt. Abreu, he had to go. It helped Abreu out. It was good for him. It was good for the Phillies. That was a win-win trade, no question about it.
Refresh my memory. Even though it's about a year and a half before that 45-year window you mentioned, did Jim Cott come here by trade or free agency?
Kitty Cott swapped to Phillies, as the baseball card said, in 1976. The question is, who did he get swapped for?
I believe it might be someone we've discussed earlier today.
It would have to be that Dick Ruthven, would it not?
Dick did go through the White Sox
To the
before he went
Braves.
to the Braves,
That's correct.
but I was thinking that Bill Naharodny was involved in that.
No. Bill Naharodny actually, it's funny, I actually talked to him about this on Facebook. Bill Naharodny left the team as a minor league free agent. I don't remember the details. It was really fascinating.
He did end up in the Chicago.
Oh yeah,
White
he
Sox
played for White
organization.
Sox for a few years. He was a very serviceable major league player. He wasn't a star. He wasn't even a starter necessarily. He was a very serviceable player. I want to say that players that were involved could have been involved with Mike Anderson, Tom Buskey. That might have been one of those guys in that trade. Again,
Didn't Essien end up in the White Sox organization?
Essien ended up with the White Sox. So there was some kind of trade combined. But I remember Cott coming over in the winter of '75, early '76, but I do not remember who was on the other end of that trade. But again, Ruthven, Buskey, and Mike Anderson all went to the White Sox. I believe Mike Anderson went to the White Sox also. But I do not remember off the top of my head. And as you know, we don't look things up on SwamiLee's Sports Talk. We either know it or we don't know it. So
Once in a while we even make it up, but that's a state secret.
yes, but that's beside the point. Last trade of the day, because we're running out of time, involved that Don Hahn and that Dave Schneck. What trade am I talking about, Mike?
Were they the return for John Stearns?
They were involved in the John Stearns trade. That is correct. Do you know who else was in the John Stearns trade? Oh, come on. You tell me you seriously don't know who this is?
Dale Unser?
No.
No. Bill Robinson?
No. Really? Are you seriously don't know who was in the
Tug
John
McGraw.
Stearns? Tug McGraw. Exactly right. Max Scarce was in that trade. Max Scarce went to the Mets. John Stearns went to the Mets. The Phillies got McGraw. I'm trying to remember if Don Hahn and Dave Schneck went from the Phillies or to the Mets. I don't even remember that. But again, the key to that deal was that Frank Edwin Tug McGraw. So,
And exactly why Mets ownership chose to give up on him, it's not clear, because he helped them get to the pennant in '73.
and 69. He was there both. He came up in around 65, 66. So, which is hard to believe that he played that long, but he did. He played almost 20 years. But and that was a good Phillies trade. I mean, there were some good ones mixed in, but there were so many bad ones that, you know, the one GM, Lee Thomas, he was a horrible drafter. He was a great for trades. I mean,
He did the Samuel trade.
the same day he did the Samuel trade, he did another trade. You remember what trade that was?
That was the trade with the Giants that got them Mulholland and Cook and Hayes.
And Charlie Hayes for that Steve Bedrosian. So that was definitely a no-lose situation there. But Lee Thomas couldn't draft. That was the biggest problem, Lee Thomas. He was great in trades, but he just couldn't draft. You know, I mean, Mickey Morandini is one of their better draft picks. And he was a serviceable second baseman for a long time, but he was never good. He was never good. He was just serviceable. Blake, any last thoughts? Because as usual, we've gone way over. Way over.
Well, you say that Lee Thomas could draft but couldn't trade.
No, he couldn't trade. He could trade,
Yes,
but he
could
couldn't
trade,
draft.
but he couldn't draft.
He couldn't draft.
It seems to me that Ed Wade was almost the opposite of that.
No.
He made a few decent trades, but
No, Ed Wade didn't make any decent trades. I mean, I'm sure he did one or two, don't get me wrong, but Ed Wade screwed everything up, okay? He got lucky on a couple draft picks, and other than that, yeah, take out Rollins, Hamels, Utley, and Howard, and tell me about how great he was. He had the first pick in the draft, for God's sake. I mean, granted, Matt Klentak screwed up the first pick in the draft, but for heaven's sake, injuries aside, it's hard to totally miss. I mean, the Pirates took Jeff Home Run King years ago. He wasn't a great player, but he was serviceable because he stayed healthy. It's these pitchers that keep getting drafted overall number one, like Brian Bullington, that they're just not healthy. How about that Mark Appel the Phillies have had in the system? You know, he couldn't stay healthy, and then it all went downhill from there.
Todd Van Poppel?
He had injuries, and he is a topic for another day, because you could talk for an hour on what happened to Todd Van Poppel. That was what happened. He had to have a major league contract, Todd Van Poppel, and because of that, they only had 3 years to develop a high school kid, or risk losing him to waivers. So they had to keep him after those 3 options expired. So they ended up having to turn around and keep him on the roster when he wasn't ready. So anyway, we go on Todd Van Poppel all day. Mike, we might as well tie it up because we've gone over time as always. Anything last thoughts?
Other than the fact that I'm looking forward to see what Dave Dombrowski does in a vain attempt in July to turn this team into a playoff team, I got nothing else to say about trades.
Teams can win 88 games as it stands right now. If they make some trades in July, they could win over 90. Well, anyway, thanks so much for tuning in. I'm SwamiLee.
I'm Mellow Mike, who's telling you they will not win more than 84 games as constituted.
This is the guy who forgot about the Tug McGraw trade, so don't worry about what he has to say. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.